Okay, so you always hear about California, right? Like it's this super blue state.
Right.
And it's easy to think, well, that's just the way it is politically. The map's never going to change.
Yeah, for sure.
But there have been some shifts recently, some really interesting things happening that I think, might make you think twice about that.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a deep dive today into what's been going on politically in California.
Absolutely.
And, for a long time.
Yeah, California has been seen as like this, prized possession for the Democrats.
Yeah, the jewel in the crown, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why lately when you talk to people, you start to see a different story, sort of starting to kind of bubble up. And some are even calling it like el estado peor gobernado.
Oh, wow.
The worst governed state.
I mean, it's interesting when you talk to people about California, you do get these really strong reactions, You either get out or what are you guys doing?
Right.
It's so funny.
And what's interesting too is even with all that frustration, you have a lot of Californians who are like, no, we're staying and we're going to fight to change it.
Yeah, they really want things to be different there.
Yeah, they're invested.
Yeah. And that's really cool. And it seems like it's starting to manifest a little bit in some ways.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is it's not just feelings. It's starting to actually play out in election results.
Oh, wow.
And I think a really good example of this is what happened in Huntington Beach.
Oh, okay.
That classic Southern California surf town?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Not that long ago, Democrats had a huge majority on the city council, 6-1.
Wow. Okay, so let's break down Huntington Beach.
Yeah.
Because from what we've seen, there was this effort back in 2022 where a group of Republicans decided to kind of band together and support a slate of candidates.
Right.
And they actually flipped the city council.
Yeah.
They went from being the minority to having a 4-3 advantage after those midterm elections.
And they didn't just stop there, right? Yeah, they got in there and got to work.
They started enacting a pretty conservative agenda. They really focused on things that, resonate with a lot of voters. Crime, homelessness, even got into what's being taught in schools.
Oh, wow.
They even managed to pass a voter ID requirement just locally.
Wow. Okay, so they really hit the ground running there in Huntington Beach, and now...
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
That wasn't just a one-time thing in the next election. That same group of Republicans, they actually called themselves the Magnificent Seven.
Oh my gosh.
They swept every single seat on the council.
Wow. So it went from super Democrat to now completely Republican?
Yeah, it's a complete 180.
Wow, that's a huge swing.
It's a big statement locally.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It really makes you think about, are these just little isolated things or is this part of something bigger?
Yeah, is this a trend? Are we seeing this in other places?
And if you look at the county level, you start to see some interesting stuff too.
Okay, what will almost a fifth of all counties in California flipped from blue to red in 2024.
Wow. Okay, so that's 10 counties out of the 58.
Right.
That's a lot.
And it's not just small rural areas either.
Yeah, because Fresno flipped.
Exactly.
And that's the 5th biggest city in California.
Yeah, so it's not just a Huntington Beach thing. It suggests there might be something bigger happening.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just who's winning the elections.
Right.
It's how people are voting on certain issues too.
Exactly, like Proposition 36.
Okay, Proposition 36. So fill us in on that one.
So that was a statewide ballot measure.
Okay.
And it passed with a huge majority.
Really? How much?
Over 70% of voters supported it.
Wow.
And what's interesting about it is it kind of reversed some key parts of this older Proposition 47.
Okay.
So for some background propositions, Proposition 47 basically changed some nonviolent property and drug offenses from felonies to misdemeanors.
Oh, okay.
And the idea was to reduce the prison population. But then Proposition 36 came along and said, now we're going to change some of that back. And the fact that it passed with so much support makes you think maybe people are changing their minds about some of these criminal justice reforms.
Yeah, they're having second thoughts, maybe.
And we saw that in other ways, too, with those efforts to recall some DAs.
Right, like George Gascon.
Exactly. He was the DA in L.A.,
Yeah.
and a lot of people thought he was too soft on crime.
Yeah, and he ended up getting recalled.
Yep.
Wow. So that's a big statement, too. And then there were some other ballot measures that failed that you might have expected to do well in California.
Right, like the ones to raise the minimum wage.
Yeah.
And implement rent control and raise taxes.
Huh?
Those all failed.
Which is really interesting because those are usually pretty popular ideas in California.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if maybe voters' priorities are shifting,
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe they're more worried about the cost of living and don't want to support things that could make it worse.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you have the presidential elections, which California is still, heavily Democrat.
Yeah, of course.
But even there, we saw something interesting.
Right. The former president did better there than any Republican candidate in, decades.
Really?
Yeah, it's still a blue state, but that kind of performance suggests there might be some movement happening under the surface.
Yeah, for sure. And when you look at voter registration numbers, you see another piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah, there's this trend of Republicans gaining registered voters and Democrats losing them.
So those little shifts can definitely add up over time and really impact elections down the road.
For sure.
Okay, so we've got all these changes happening, the Huntington Beach situation, the county flips the propositions, the presidential results, the voter registration numbers. What's the explanation? What's going on?
Well, our source has a pretty strong opinion about this. They say it all comes down to what they call the new DEI.
Okay, the new DEI.
Which they define as Democrat extremism and incompetence.
Okay, so they're really laying it out there.
Yeah, and they point specifically to Governor Newsom's leadership.
Okay, so they're connecting all of this to him.
Yeah. They basically argue that California has been going in the wrong direction under his leadership.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what kind of evidence do they have for that?
Well, they cite a lot of statistics about the state of California. They say it has the highest poverty rate in the country when you adjust for cost of living.
Wow.
And of course, the cost of living is incredibly high. Housing, gas, electricity, water, all super expensive.
Yeah, no kidding.
And they point to other problems too, like high unemployment, slow income growth, a bad business, climate struggling schools, and of course the whole homelessness crisis.
Right, and it's interesting because a lot of people, when they think of California, they think of Hollywood and Silicon Valley and all this wealth.
Right.
But there's a whole other side to it, obviously.
Definitely. And the author even tells this story about fire hydrants running out of water in some places.
Oh, wow.
Which, if it's true, really makes you think about whether things are working properly.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark picture that they paint.
It's a very critical take on the current leadership and the direction the state is headed.
Yeah, and they don't hold back at all. They go on to say that Gavin Newsom's legacy might end up being turning California red.
Yeah. I mean, to say that about a state that's been so blue for so long is a pretty bold prediction.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, so let's take a step back here. We've seen a lot of change in California, right? Huntington Beach, flipping all those counties, red voters changing their minds on criminal justice and economic policies. The former president doing better than expected shifts in voter registration.
Right. And this perspective we've been talking about basically says that all of this is because people are getting fed up with how things are going in California.
Yeah, they're frustrated with the cost of living, with homelessness, with how things are being run.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so here's the question I have for you as you're listening to all of this. What could this mean for the future of California? What are the long-term implications of all these changes? Are we just seeing a little blip, or is this the beginning of something bigger?
Is California really starting to shift politically?
Yeah. And what would that mean for the rest of the country?
It's something to think about for sure.
Yeah. We always talk about AmeriCast and how California is this bellwether state.
Right.
So if things are really changing there, what does that tell us about the direction of the whole country?
Lots to ponder.
Yeah, a lot to ponder indeed. It's definitely a fascinating time to be watching California politics.
No doubt.
It'll be really interesting to see how things play out over the next few years.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll see you next time.
See it.